market. We have this very low VIX with this kind of weakening of relative strength and momentum, this kind of negative divergence despite the markets continuing to rise here. That typically is a good recipe for a correction, but you need something to cause it. Here's what you need to know before the bell this morning. So markets rallied a little bit yesterday. Again, we just continue right now at least, and markets are looking to open up flattish this morning. S&P right now is up about 3.8 points, so not a lot, basically flat. But we're just flirting with this kind of this kind of previous set of highs that have been kind of in the markets for the last few days, and it's just not been one of these more exciting periods of the market. For any stretch of the imagination. A very tight trading range here is holding right above the 20-day moving average. So that's all fine, right? That's fine, and that kind of consolidation is actually kind of healthy. It lets markets kind of work off some of its kind of overbought conditions. But again, we have this negative divergence that we talked about yesterday in both momentum and relative strength. That hasn't improved. Market breadth is a percentage of stocks trading, off their 52-week highs, is very low. So we've got a lot of stocks that really are not participating in this rally to any great degree. We've talked about healthcare, we've talked about utilities, talked about real estate. There's a big swath of the S&P 500 that is not trading well. We have a very small kind of defined sector of the market that is trading well, which is pretty much technology and finance. So those two kind of areas have been doing well at this point. But again, as we've kind of talked about before, it's about volatility. And right now there is absolutely no concern of the market and this issue of kind of volatility in the markets. And this is kind of the point that I was kind of making, is that there's so much complacency in the market. This is really kind of what sets up the markets for a bigger correction at some point, because this volatility is getting so compressed here and markets are getting very, very exuberant that at some point that has to reverse. There's going to be something that cracks the markets and you're going to get a decent correction. Again, we're not talking about 50% sell-off, anything like that, but a 5-10% correction is going to feel pretty painful after this kind of very complacent run. Most people have forgotten about that 20% decline that we've had back in March and early April. That was very painful for a lot of investors. There was a lot of panic in the markets. There was a lot of, kind of distribution coming out of the market at that point. We saw a lot of individuals that, were previously very complacent panicking within the markets. We were getting tons of emails and phone calls. Oh my gosh, what's happening here? That's all been forgotten with this rally. And this has been a very, very strong rally. And we've really, that big spike in the VIX, we've completely compressed that back to the previous kind of very, very low levels in the markets, which just, again, low volatility tends to beget high volatility at some point. All you need is a catalyst. And so this is that kind of that fuel for the markets here. And again, as we just kind of talked about earlier, we have this very low VIX with this kind of weakening of relative strength and momentum, this kind of negative divergence despite the markets continuing to rise here. That typically is a good recipe for a correction, but you need something to cause it. I have no idea what that's going to be. We could wake up tomorrow. It could be NVIDIA, right? NVIDIA may miss tonight, and that could certainly create a volatility spike if we get a big sell-off in a lot of those AI-related stocks, which is a possibility. So again, just as we talked about before, hedge some risk, take some positioning, think about kind of how you're positioned within the markets. And right now, I know it's hard to think that way because it's like, hey, this market just goes up every day. Why worry about those things? But this is when you worry about those things, is when there seems to be nothing to worry about. That's the time that things usually happen that are very unexpected and cause a sharper market correction. That's what you need to know before the bell this morning.